step up to this kind of power, this kind of challenge, this kind of flying, crashing feeling. When you decide to get serious, there's only one place to come, the games of Super Nintendo. No one else creates this kind of experience, because no one else creates these kinds of games. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
You're probably wondering why I'm starting this video with a random Super Nintendo commercial. 3 words. Young Paul Rudd. Yeah, that's actually him. No other reason, I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was funny. Also, I'm sick, so if I don't sound right during this video, then just deal with it. Because I'm an adult, I can do what I want. Stop harassing me, Grandma! I've mentioned this a couple times in a few of my other videos, but the Super Nintendo was the very first console I ever played and owned. Even though I didn't grow up playing that many games for it, the memories I have with the SNES are practically impossible for me to forget. Nintendo's always been a huge part of my childhood, as they have been for plenty others, and when they're not depicting mice having their way with the Game Boy Micro, that's just gross. They're using the power of nostalgia to sell more products. This was the case in 2016 when Nintendo caught the world by surprise by releasing the NES Classic Edition. 30 classic NES titles all wrapped up in a neat little plug-and-play box. Released in very limited quantities, and I mean very limited quantities, it proved to be so successful that less than a year later, a follow-up came onto the scene in the form of the SNES Classic Edition. Now in even more limited quantities. Okay, let me just get this out of the way. These systems were severely mishandled. If you managed to get an NES Classic or SNES Classic when they first came out, consider yourselves lucky. They were extremely hard to find, supply and demand were never even, retailers getting their stock refilled was about as rare as the consoles themselves, and the only reliable way to get your hands on one of these was usually by giving into scalpers and hoarders, which nobody likes doing. I decided not to pick up an NES Classic since I was getting pretty tired from how poorly Nintendo was managing them, and honestly, I kinda stopped caring by the time the SNES Classic came out. I knew I was gonna grab this thing at some point. I mean, I felt like I had to. It had a lot of fan-favorite titles included, most of which I've never played before, and plus we were finally gonna get to play a complete polished version of Star Fox 2. That certainly added to the console's value. After the hype died down, and just as Nintendo started making these more widely available again, thank you, I finally managed to get one. It cost me about $100 on eBay, but I wanted one, I got one, I have one, and that's all that matters. And as always, I took too long to get to something that was more popular when it first came out. So I basically missed the bandwagon long after it left the station. But I figured this was a good time for me to finally give it a look, so let's give it a look. We'll start with the packaging. The design of the box is very similar to that of the original, with the black and gray color scheme, the 16 yellow dots going down the side, and just the overall aesthetic is a perfect replication of that early 90s art style. On the front, there's a picture of the console with the controllers, and to the right we get some examples of the games that are included, but more on those later. On one side, we're given a description of the console itself, while above it is a picture of it held in a dainty female hand. I can't decide which one looks smaller. Meanwhile, on the other side, we get a description of the controller that comes with the system. Since the SNES Classic is part of the Classics line, we get the word Classics on top of the box with a drawing of the SNES controller, just to remind us that this is indeed the SNES Classic. Finally, on the back, we're bombarded with box art for each of the games included on the console, with random pieces of character artwork added for good measure. While over to the left is a written list of game titles, and the bottom of the box is where all the warnings and legal stuff are. Wait a minute, who the heck is Active Boiki KK? I thought this was a Nintendo system. What did these guys do? What does the KK even stand for? KK Slider? Did I accidentally buy this from some illegitimate side business he's running? Well, here we have the SNES Classic itself, and it's super tiny. The console's design and overall form factor is almost note for note taken from the original Super Nintendo, just in a smaller size. Since I'm a stupid American, our version is based on the Western design, while the Japanese and European releases are based on their region's respective iterations. The Nintendo logo is molded in the plastic in the upper right corner, the SNES logo is printed below the cartridge slot, which doesn't work since the games are already on the device itself, and it's got the same power and reset switches, eject button, controller ports, and power light. The back has an HDMI out port to connect it to a TV, and a DC in port to plug it into an outlet. The SNES Classic comes with its own HDMI cable, but while the box says it also comes with an AC adapter, my system did not. But since the power cable it comes with runs on a generic USB signal, you can plug it into any USB adapter and it'll work just fine. Now here's the controller that comes with the SNES Classic. Just kidding, it's a real Super Nintendo controller. This is the one that comes with the SNES Classic. Yeah, looks pretty spot on, doesn't it? It feels about the same as well, right down to the rubbery start and select buttons.
Oh yeah, so rubbery.
And unlike the NES Classic, which only came with one controller, the SNES Classic comes with two controllers. Each of them uses the same controller port that the ones for the NES Classic had, so you can also plug them into Wii remotes and use them to play games on the Virtual Console. That is, if you already had any before the Wii Shop channel got shut down. Oh my god, what is up with my hair? Anyway, I can't seem to plug these controllers into the system, so what do? Well, take a look at this, dudes. These controller ports aren't real. It's just a door that can be pulled down to reveal the actual controller ports. They're not as cleverly hidden as the controller ports on the NES Classic, but it's still pretty smart. Here's what the menu looks like. The games are displayed across the screen and can be sorted alphabetically by release date, publisher, times played, recently played, and so forth. Playing a game is as simple as scrolling through them, picking one you like, and there you go. But if you want to boot up another game, just push the reset switch and you'll be sent back to the menu. After that, you have the option to create a save point for your game or rewind your progress and go back a maximum of 5 minutes or so. By the way, I didn't notice until now that the top and bottom parts of the screen are the SNES cartridge slot and power switches. Yes, I am indeed a stupid American! The SNES Classic lets you choose from 3 different filters: Standard, Pixel Perfect, and CRT, for all those players who want to look at hideous scan lines on an HD TV. There's no way to change the aspect ratio from 4:3 to 16:9, but for me, that's a good thing, since I'm not a fan of seeing old games be stretched to fill a wide screen. Just in case the boring black backdrop doesn't work for you, you can select different frames to fill up the blank space. Some of them are pretty cool, like this wood frame one, but I was just gonna show my footage using my regular backdrop. Okie dokie, so we've gone through all the technical stuff. Let's take a look at all the games that come with the system. There's 21 games included on the SNES Classic, some of which I've already covered in other videos. So for this portion, I'm going to give very brief overviews on all the games that are here in alphabetical order. And keep in mind, I'm mostly basing these on first impressions, so I haven't completed any of the games for this video. And because of that, I'm not really going to go into full detail on each one. I'm just going to be giving opinions based on the short amount of time that I've spent on them. So, yeah. First up is Contra 3, The Alien Wars. In the oddly specific year of 2636, aliens are attacking the Earth, and it's up to Jimbo and Sully to put an end to their chaos. Sadly, it's not a Simpsons Monsters, Inc. crossover. I might have mentioned this before, but I'm a pretty big fan of the old-school Contra games on the NES. Surprisingly though, I've played very little of the third game. That's partly why I was looking forward to making this video, so I could put more time into it. And I'm glad that I have, because Contra 3 is more of what I enjoyed about the first 2 games. You can use a bunch of different weapons to take down creatures of all shapes and sizes, you can shoot in 8 directions, and there are even some top-down levels to add a little more variety. Only they're really clunky and kind of an eyesore. And in typical Contra fashion, this game is hard. Even on the easy setting, it's not super beginner-friendly. But if you persevere and keep those save states handy, you'll be in for a great side-scrolling shooter worthy of the Contra name. Game number 2, Donkey Kong Country. A bit of a shame that the other Donkey Kong Country games aren't included, but the first one's always been my favorite of the trilogy, and one of my favorite SNES games in general, so I'm glad that it's here. It's another side-scroller with you in control of Donkey Kong and his nephew Diddy Kong, as they go on a quest to retrieve their stolen bananas from King Krow and his army of Kremlings. This is one of the most addicting platformers I've ever played. Every time I pick it up, I never want to put it down. I love how it feels, I love the level design, I love the art style, I love the soundtrack, I just want more of it. It's like a drug, only it doesn't do any physical damage to your body. Sometimes. I know the sequels add a lot more to the formula, and I'm sure most people prefer Donkey Kong Country 2, but for me, it's the first game that wins me over with its simple but addicting gameplay. All it's missing is the DK rap, and it'll be the greatest game ever made. Chunky probably won't make it, because, well, you know.
He's dead.
Next up is the cult classic EarthBound. Originating in Japan as the second installment of the Mother series, this is a game that wasn't highly praised when it came out in North America, but in the past decade or so, it's developed quite the following and is now often considered one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, and sometimes even in general. I understand why it's so beloved, but personally, I never really got into it. I always felt it was a bit tedious, and its sense of humor never really clicked with me. But to my surprise, after getting footage of it for this video, I found myself warming up to it more, and something about it just made me want to keep going. Not to complete it, but just to see where things were going to go. I'm not a big fan of its battle system, and I still find the gameplay to be a bit of a chore, but when I took the time to process everything that's been established, the characters and setup and whatnot, I admittedly got kind of curious. I know the story gets a bit deeper and more psychological as the game progresses, so maybe I'll pick it up again someday and see what happens. I'm not counting on it, but who knows?
Who knew? I knew. We all knew.
Next on our list is Final Fantasy III, or Final Fantasy VI as it's actually called. I'm not an expert in the field of role-playing games, and Final Fantasy was never a series I was hugely interested in, but I'm kinda liking Final Fantasy III so far. Thousands of years after a great big war took place, part of the world has been taken over by the Empire. What? I don't have time to go over the whole story, so I'll just say it's Final Fantasy with a steampunk setting. I feel I can't really do this game justice after only putting an hour of playtime into it, but so far, my feelings toward it are about the same as EarthBound. It hasn't completely blown my mind, but I'd like to keep playing it when I have the time for it. I don't really like how you have to wait until this energy bar fills up to attack, especially when you go through attacks as quickly as I do, and the random encounters on the map can be pretty annoying. Aside from that, I like what I see here, and that music is just beautiful.
Oh, so good.
Up next is a classic SNES launch title, F-Zero. This is a racing game in its purest form. You have the option from 4 different drivers to pick from, but let's face it, you're all just gonna pick Captain Falcon. And all you have to do is come in first place. There's no items, no fancy gimmicks or anything. Your victory is only determined by your skill. And while some may look at this as bland, I think it's a lot of fun. If you don't mind playing with yourself.
Oh my.
Not like that. I mean, F-Zero doesn't have multiplayer. Kind of odd that Nintendo, of all people, wouldn't think to put this in, but yeah, it's single player only. The controls can also be pretty weird. I guess it makes sense for hover cars to feel, well, floaty, but it only makes sharp turns harder to pull off. These are only minor issues though, since the rest of the game is just fine. There's no reason to go back to the original F-Zero nowadays, considering how superior its sequels are, but it's definitely a classic in its own right. Next up, we have Kirby Superstar. This was the original Jackbox Party Pack before Jack had a box and was throwing a party in it after getting kicked in the fanny pack. Kirby Superstar is a collection of various minigames of varying quality. Spring Breeze is a remake of the original Kirby's Dream Land with some added Mario cameos. Gourmet Race involves Kirby racing against King Dedede to reach the end of the stage with the most food. The Great Cave Offensive is a mode where Kirby goes around collecting hidden treasures, and it's honestly not that much fun. And Dynablade involves Kirby going after a giant bird, and it's also not that much fun. A lot of people consider Kirby Superstar to be the best in the series, but for me, it's kind of 50-50. When it's not busy asking if you want to know how the copy ability works, and then explaining it anyway, even if you tell it not to, it's entertaining me with only half of the experience, and that's sort of my big issue with Kirby Superstar, because even then, it doesn't really keep me hooked for very long. Granted, I don't have all the games unlocked, but getting them would require me to spend more time with what's available from the start, and I'm not really up to the challenge. Then there's Kirby's Dream Course. It's mini golf, and it's boring. I mean, I guess it's not awful, but is this it? Is this really it? From what I've played, there's not that much else. What you see is what you get. Where's Kirby's Dream Land 3? Nobody talks about it much, but I really like that game. Why couldn't we have gotten that instead? I don't want golf in my bloody Kirby game. I'm Scottish. Anyway, let's take a look at Mega Man X. I really wanted to love this game, but what keeps me from loving it is the same thing that keeps me from loving most of the other Mega Man games. I call them Capcomisms. These are just some little things in early Capcom games that aren't that big of a deal, but still find a way to get under your skin. Respawning enemies, knockback, annoying enemy placement, instances where it seems impossible to get through without taking damage. These aren't just specific to Capcom, but most of their older games, specifically their platformers, are chock full of them. This is definitely a me problem, and I admit I'm not the greatest Mega Man player in the world, so I'm not immediately going to say the game's bad because I suck at it. Who do you think I am, a video game journalist? Mega Man X has a lot going for it. Compared to the classic series, it has better controls, a more versatile Mega Man, and a pretty head-banging soundtrack. It definitely deserves all the praise it gets, it's just not entirely my kind of game. Up next is Secret of Mana. I've been interested in this game for a while since my close friend and fellow Daisy enthusiast Lizzie Freeman voiced the character Popoi in the PS4 remake. Of course I knew about the game before the remake was announced, but I never really played it until now. Though I didn't put a whole lot of hours into it when I was getting footage for this video, for the most part, I was having an okay time with it. The battle system is like an early version of Kingdom Hearts, where it's more action-oriented than turn-based, which I like. The only thing I struggled with was, weirdly enough, using items. I bought some stuff from the store and I tried finding them on the menu, but there didn't seem to be an option for it, just equipping weapons and checking your status. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, or maybe I can only use items in certain situations, but I would have preferred if they made navigation a little bit easier to understand. The rest of the game is okay, but not a heavy hitter for me. Next game, Star Fox. The only Star Fox games I really played the most were this, Star Fox 64, the 3DS remake, and Star Fox Zero, which is a good game, and I don't care what anybody says. It's been a while since I've dabbled with the original, so this was a perfect opportunity for me to give it another go, and it's a lot better than I remember. It may be primitive compared to its successors, but I still think it's a pretty fun game. As Fox McCloud, you and your fellow Star Fox teammates, who sound like robotic Animal Crossing characters, are on a mission to protect the galaxy from the evil forces of Andross. You progress from one stage to the next, fly in an R-Wing, go shooty shooty bang bang, take down foes, and make sure you and your boys make it out alive. Star Fox 2 is the same idea, only more open-ended, and with girls. This game was pretty much finished and ready to come out in 1996, but was cancelled after Nintendo shifted focus to the Nintendo 64 and churned out a new Star Fox game for it just a year later. And if you've played Star Fox 64 as much as I have, you can see just how much it took from Star Fox 2. Same goes for Zero with the walking R-Wing sections. That game is still good, and you're all just being mean. Between the two Super Nintendo games, I think I like Star Fox 2 a little more. Instead of following a linear path, you can fly around to any point on the map and complete whatever missions are given to you. There's much more variety here, and it adds a lot of replayability. I genuinely had a good time playing it, and I can really appreciate it for how much it contributed to the Star Fox series, even though Nintendo's been keeping it locked away for over 20 years. Moving on, let's talk about Street Fighter II Turbo. The Street Fighter series to me is very much a style over substance kind of thing. I like the art style, the characters, and the world they inhabit, and lest we forget about this famous scene. Yes! Yes! But I don't really enjoy playing the games a whole lot, and Street Fighter II reminded me why this is. Unless you don't mind spending hours or even years of your life cramming these ridiculously long button combos into your head, a game of Street Fighter will most likely play out like a button-mashing trampoline show. There is a learning curve, but it's a bit too steep for my liking. When it comes to fighting games, I definitely prefer something like Smash Bros. Over this, thanks to its simpler controls. Street Fighter is still widely praised by many, and I'm not going to argue with the fact that it pretty much single-handedly made fighting games a staple in the industry. And maybe the other games are better. I do have Ultra Street Fighter 2 and the 30th Anniversary Collection for the Switch, so maybe I'll find out for myself. One thing's for sure, I won't be in a rush to get back in the ring with this version of Street Fighter anytime soon. Now let's get to something truly special, Super Castlevania IV. Good God, I love this game. I pretty much enjoyed all the classic Castlevania games, but this one was always my favorite, and I couldn't be happier to see it here. While it drops some welcome features from Castlevania III, it makes up for that by giving Simon new abilities and, most importantly, better controls. Simon handles better than he ever has before, and sub-weapons are even assigned to their own button for easier use. The game not only packs a great atmosphere and delivers on a high-quality soundtrack, which is typical for Castlevania, but it also feels a little more balanced than the older titles. It doesn't feel too hard, but it doesn't feel too easy either. In that sense, I think it makes Castlevania IV a perfect starting point for anyone who's just getting into the series. I seriously can't recommend it enough, and if you haven't played this yet, then you're punishing yourself more so than you would be playing the next game on our list. Here we have Super Ghouls and Ghosts. Remember those Capcom-isms I brought up before with Mega Man X? This game's guilty of using them too, only it's much harder. There's an easy mode, but what's the point? It feels about the same, so they'd might as well just have hard mode, harder mode, and screw you mode. Put up next to the original Ghosts and Goblins, I guess Super Ghouls and Ghosts is better. Arthur has a double jump, there are armor upgrades, even though they don't give you extra hit points, and there's a better selection of weapons at your disposal. But it's still Ghosts and Goblins. It's still needlessly difficult, and it's still not well designed. This is one game where the save points and rewind feature really come in handy. Trust me, you're gonna need them. Alright, time for this guy. Oh, where'd your hat go? Alright, time for this guy to get some attention for a while, which, coming from me, is no surprise. Let's take a look at Super Mario Kart. Mario definitely gets the most representation on the SNES Classic, and it's no wonder why. Some of the most revered Super Nintendo games are part of the Mario franchise, and Super Mario Kart is one of them. I spoke about this game during my Mario Kart retrospective, so I won't go that much deeper here. Do I even need to explain how Mario Kart works? I think everybody knows how to play it at this point. You've got a roster full of Mario characters, and you and a friend try to kill each other with banana peels and turtle shells while competing for the first place spot. As the first of what would eventually become a whole spin-off series, Super Mario Kart firmly establishes the formula that other games would continue to build upon. Judging it on its own, it's still a relatively good time, but it hasn't aged gracefully. The controls, for example, are very sluggish and not the most responsive, and the character sprites don't always blend very well with the backgrounds. It doesn't diminish the game's nostalgic charm in any way, however. While Super Mario Kart isn't a personal favorite of mine, I'd say it's still worth a look. Up next is Super Mario RPG: Legend of the Seven Stars. The RPG side of the Mario franchise is one that I haven't explored very far beyond the Paper Mario games, so I don't really have that much experience with this one. I do think it's pretty good. Not one of the best games out there, but certainly an enjoyable one. It checks off all the requirements role-playing games should meet, while at the same time offering the right kind of humor and character to make Mario fans like me feel right at home. There are no random encounters, thankfully, and with how everything is so straightforward, battles never feel intimidating. Yet they're not really very exciting either. As your party gets bigger, taking down foes gets easier than chasing someone through a supermarket in heavy rain. What I'm saying is, it gets a bit repetitive after a while, and that's pretty much why I'm taking so long to beat it. One day I will, but this just isn't the day. Oh boy, get ready for some pure, unfiltered, nostalgic bias. The next game on our list is Super Mario World. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, this is the very first video game I ever played, and my absolute favorite of all time. If it wasn't part of this package, I would have stabbed somebody in the face with a soldering iron. This game means so much to me, and if you want to hear me gush about it more, you can go watch my review of it from a couple years ago. Keep in mind, it's a bit outdated, but my thoughts on the game still hold up. Super Mario World is a game that encourages exploration and speed running, and any kind of player can latch onto it for any number of reasons. It's perfect for those who want to take it easy. It's perfect for those looking for a challenge. Even as someone who's been playing this game since the day I was born and knows every secret by heart, it still manages to surprise me. Like, after all these years, I had no idea you could change Cape Mario's direction while flying using the second run button. Thanks to the Super Mario Bros. Encyclopedia for revealing that to me. I can't go on too much longer about this game, though I wish I could, so I think you get the idea. Super Mario World is a wonderful game that everybody should play. That's it for Mario, sort of. Now let's talk about Super Metroid. Once upon a time, there was a stupid little 18-year-old boy who thought it would be a good idea to make a video where he just trash-talked a bunch of popular games. That boy was me. I feel stupid for even making that video, I hate everything about it, it doesn't represent the person I am now, and so to make sure no one would ever see it again, I had it locked away in a top-secret facility, Raiders of the Lost Ark style. Wait, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, Super Metroid. This was one of the games I brought up in that terrible video, and nowadays I think the game is pretty good. It has a chilling atmosphere, smooth controls, explorative level design, secrets to uncover, and a badass leading lady with some badass weapons. Though the worlds aren't always fun to traverse through, and despite it being a bit cryptic here and there, I can see why Super Metroid is hailed as a classic, and it definitely deserves to be a part of this collection. Alright, next game is Super Punch-Out! I was surprised to see it be included on the SNES Classic, primarily because I haven't heard many good things about it. Maybe there's a reason for that, because this game is just kinda there. I mean, it's Punch-Out, just on the Super Nintendo. Nothing great, nothing terrible, pretty much middle of the road, but totally playable. Up next we have The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. For years I didn't really think very highly of this game, but as I was getting footage for this video, I seriously had a hard time putting the controller down. As I made my way through the dungeon to get the first pendant, there were a lot of moments where I felt like a genius for solving certain puzzles, and I love when games have that effect on me. I've said in the past that I've never been a huge fan of the Zelda series, but after playing A Link Between Worlds, Breath of the Wild, and now this, I think I might just give the rest of the games another chance someday. And aside from Link's pink hair and the slightly annoying choice of instruments used in the Kakariko Village theme, Link to the Past might be close to making my favorite SNES games list. Seriously, it's really fun. Finally, we're at the last game on the SNES Classic, Yoshi's Island. Last time I gave this one some attention was when I reviewed it back in 2015, and needless to say, that video's aged quite a bit. But I can just about say the same for all of my older videos. I haven't played enough of Yoshi's Island in recent years to really come up with a fully updated opinion on it, but like with Super Metroid and Link to the Past, it's a game that, so far, has gotten better for me over time. It has one of the most unique art styles of any game on the console, the level design is really inventive and full of hidden surprises, and the soundtrack contains some of the Mario franchise's catchiest tunes. I still don't find myself repeatedly going back to this or the other Yoshi games, but I still think Yoshi's Island is worth anybody's time, especially those who like the idea of throwing their newborn children at things. And there we have it, the SNES Classic Edition. Overall, this thing is pretty awesome. A cute little Super Nintendo-shaped box that comes with over 20 of the console's most beloved titles, and something that'll absolutely have retro gamers drowning in nostalgia. Even though I don't love every single game that's on it, the choice of games is nearly perfect. If I were to make it better, I would have traded Kirby's Dream Course for Kirby's Dream Land 3, and replaced Super Punch-Out with either a fan favorite like Chrono Trigger, or something more obscure like Stunt Race FX. And obviously, we couldn't get games that use the SNES mouse or the Super Scope, so games like Mario Paint and Yoshi Safari aren't gonna make it. That's perfectly fine with me, since I can also appreciate the SNES Classic for just about everything else. This clearly had a lot of care and effort put into it, which is more than what I can say for some other things. If you're a fan of the Super Nintendo and you want to play some of your favorite SNES games in crisp 720p, this is an absolute must-buy. Or, you know, you can just emulate them. Man, this was great. You know, since I'm feeling nostalgic, what do you say we watch another Super Nintendo commercial? Oh, look, here's one for Yoshi's Island.
Super Mario World 2, only on the Super NES. Still the big one.
The 90s were weird.